Hey friends, tonight we're diving into this incredible Greek myth that completely transforms you. We're leaving the sunlit world behind and plunging straight into the mysterious underworld, where music can literally move gods and love dares to challenge death itself. Then comes this heart-pounding climb back toward daylight, every step trembling with hope and danger. It's that moment when doubt creeps in like a whisper, threatening to shatter everything. What time is it where you are? Drop a comment, and a gentle like helps these ancient stories find other souls. Now, let's begin. In the beginning, there was silence. Perfect, endless silence that stretched across the void before the world began. Then came the first note, clear, pure, and so beautiful that it called forth the stars themselves. This was the music of creation, the song that would one day flow through the fingers of a man who would make even death itself pause to listen. The gods had their favorites among mortals, but none quite like Orpheus. Apollo, god of music and light, looked down from Olympus and smiled as he watched the young man's fingers dance across the strings of his lyre. "This one," Apollo whispered to the wind, "this one understands." For Orpheus didn't just play music, he became it. Every note that rose from his lyre carried a piece of his soul, and that soul was vast and deep as the ocean itself. The gift Apollo gave him was no ordinary blessing. When Orpheus played, the world listened, really listened. Trees would uproot themselves and lean closer to catch every note, their ancient roots breaking free from earth that had held them for centuries. Rivers would slow their ancient rush to the sea, their waters growing still and clear as glass, reflecting the sky like mirrors made of liquid starlight. Wild beasts, lions and wolves, bears and serpents, would lay down their natural hatred and rest together in perfect harmony, their savage hearts gentled by melodies that spoke of peace older than civilization itself. But the most extraordinary thing happened when Orpheus sang of love. The very air would shimmer, as if his voice could make visible the invisible threads that bind one heart to another. Birds would forget their territorial songs and join in harmonies they'd never learned, their voices weaving together in choruses that made angels weep with envy. Even the stones beneath his feet would warm, as if remembering what it felt like to be alive, to pulse with the rhythm of a beating heart. The first time the people of Thrace heard him play, they thought a god had descended to earth. He'd been traveling from village to village, carrying nothing but his lyre and the clothes on his back, sharing his gift freely with anyone who wished to listen. In the town square of a small farming community, he sat beneath an olive tree and began to play. Within minutes, the entire village had gathered. Children stopped their games and sat cross-legged in the dust, their eyes wide with wonder. Mothers paused in their daily tasks, wooden bowls forgotten in their hands. Old men who hadn't smiled in years found tears streaming down their weathered cheeks. But it wasn't just the humans who came to listen. Sparrows descended in flocks so thick they darkened the sky, their small bodies creating a living canopy above the crowd. Cats emerged from their hiding places and lay down beside the dogs they usually tormented. A flock of sheep broke through their pen and gathered in perfect formation, their usual bleating replaced by an attentive silence that seemed almost sacred. When Orpheus finished the last song of the evening, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, pregnant with the echo of something divine that had touched the mortal world and left it forever changed. "Stay," pleaded the village elder, an old woman whose hands had never stopped shaking since her husband died in the wars. "Please, stay with us. We'll give you anything, food, shelter, gold if we have it." But Orpheus shook his head gently. "Music isn't meant to be caged," he said, slinging his lyre across his shoulder. "It has to move, has to find new hearts to touch. But don't worry, what you've heard tonight, that lives in you now. It's yours to keep forever." He left them with the dawn, walking the dusty road toward the next town with the same unhurried pace he'd maintained for months. This was his life, wandering from place to place, sharing the gift Apollo had given him, watching the way music could transform anger into understanding, despair into hope, loneliness into connection. But there was something missing, something that made his music beautiful but not complete. He could see it in the faces of his audiences sometimes, a longing that his melodies awakened but could never fully satisfy. It was the same longing he felt in his own chest during the quiet moments between songs. A hollow space shaped like something he'd never experienced, but somehow knew he needed. It was this gift, this divine music flowing through mortal hands, that first caught her attention. Eurydice moved through the meadow like sunlight through leaves, graceful, warm, impossible to catch, yet somehow always there. She was a daughter of the river nymphs, blessed with their connection to growing things and their understanding of life's hidden currents. Every step she took seemed to encourage the wildflowers to bloom more brightly. And when she knelt to gather herbs for her healing work, they practically leaned into her touch. She was gathering wildflowers and medicinal plants when she heard the music drifting across the fields, a melody so achingly beautiful that she stopped mid-step, her woven basket forgotten at her feet. The flowers she'd already picked seemed to lift their petals toward the sound, as if they too yearned to understand this language of pure emotion. Even the bees humming around the lavender bushes grew quieter, as if not wanting to compete with something so perfect. She followed the music through groves of olive trees, whose silver leaves whispered approval in the warm breeze, across streams that babbled their own harmonies in response to what they heard. The melody grew stronger as she walked, richer and more complex, weaving together themes of joy and sorrow, hope and longing, in ways that made her heart race with anticipation. There, in a clearing where the afternoon sun painted everything golden, sat a young man with dark hair that caught the light like polished bronze and eyes the color of deep water at twilight. His fingers moved across the lyre strings like he was writing poetry in the air. Each note a word, each phrase a verse in the endless song of existence. But it wasn't just his skill that took her breath away. It was the way he played, as if the music were coming from somewhere deeper than technique, deeper than training, as if it were flowing directly from his soul. When their eyes met, the music didn't stop. it transformed. What had been beautiful became transcendent. What had been moving became eternal. The melody that had been speaking to the trees and flowers and sky suddenly focused itself, becoming personal, intimate, meant for her alone. Orpheus felt his heart skip not one beat, but several, as if it were trying to match the rhythm of something infinitely larger than himself. In all his travels, through all the crowds that had gathered to hear him play, no one had ever looked at him the way she was looking at him now. Not with wonder at his gift, but with recognition, as if she saw not just the musician, but the man beneath the music. "Don't stop," Eurydice said, her voice soft as evening breeze, but clear enough to carry across the clearing. "Please, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard."
"I couldn't if I tried," Orpheus replied, and he meant it. Looking at her, he understood for the first time why poets struggled so desperately with words, why painters mixed color after color but never quite captured what they saw. She was that moment just before sunrise when the world holds its breath, waiting for light to transform everything. She was the pause between lightning and thunder, pregnant with infinite possibility. "What's your name?" she asked, moving closer, but careful not to disturb the magic of the moment. "Orpheus," he said, his fingers finding a new melody, one that seemed to bloom around her name before he even knew what it was. "Eurydice," she replied. And when he played her name back to her on the lyre strings, it sounded like water over stones, like wind through wheat, like everything beautiful and alive in the world given voice. They talked until the stars emerged, their conversation weaving in and out of music like a dance between old friends. She told him about the herbs she gathered for healing, how she could sense the life force pulsing in every green thing, how the river nymphs had taught her to read the language of growing things and understand what the earth needed to stay in balance. He shared the weight of his gift, how sometimes the music felt too large for his mortal body to contain, how it filled him until he thought he might burst like an overfull wineskin, how lonely it could be to carry something so beautiful that it set him apart from everyone he met. "But not from me," Eurydice said quietly, and something in her voice made him look up from the lyre strings. "No," he agreed, wonder coloring his tone. "Not from you." "Show me," she said, as the moon reached its zenith, painting the clearing in silver light. "Show me what it feels like to hold the music of the gods." Orpheus hesitated for only a moment before placing the lyre in her hands, then covering them with his own. The instrument felt warm beneath their joined fingers, almost alive, as if it were eager to share its secrets. Together, they drew a single, perfect note from the strings. Eurydice gasped. She could feel it, the cosmic vibration that ran through all things, the thread of sound that connected every heartbeat in the universe. It was like touching lightning that didn't burn, like drinking starlight that tasted of honey and dreams. Through the lyre, she could sense the vast network of music that held the world together. The rhythm of the tides, the harmony of the spheres, the endless symphony that played in every atom and every star. "Now I understand," she whispered.
tears catching starlight on her cheeks like scattered diamonds. You don't just play music, you are music. It lives in you the way water lives in the river, the way fire lives in the sun. And you, Orpheus said, his voice rough with emotion, you hear it, really hear it, not just in notes, but what they mean. From that night forward, they were inseparable. Orpheus discovered that his gift grew stronger in her presence, as if love itself were the missing note he'd been searching for all his life. When he played now, the music spoke not just of beauty, but of belonging, not just of longing, but of fulfillment. The melodies that had once wandered seemed to find their home, their purpose, their reason for existing. The gods themselves leaned down from Olympus to listen, amazed at how mortal love could transform divine music into something even more magnificent. Apollo watched with paternal pride, remembering his own great loves and understanding how they had deepened his own artistry. Even Hades, lord of the underworld, paused in his dark palace to listen when the wind carried Orpheus's love songs down to the realm of the dead. They traveled together for months, sharing Orpheus's gift with communities throughout Greece. Eurydice proved to be more than just inspiration. She had her own talents that complemented his perfectly. While his music could heal hearts and calm spirits, her knowledge of herbs and healing could mend bodies and restore health. Together, they brought wholeness to places that had known only fragments. In a village devastated by plague, Orpheus played while Eurydice prepared medicines from the plants that grew wild in the surrounding hills. The music gave people hope, while her remedies gave them health. In a town torn apart by blood feuds that had lasted generations, his melodies opened hearts to forgiveness, while her gentle wisdom showed them practical ways to rebuild trust. Everywhere they went, they left communities stronger than they'd found them. But more importantly, they discovered in their shared work a love that seemed to grow deeper every day. Not the desperate, consuming passion of new romance, but something richer and more sustainable. A love built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the joy of creating beauty together. "I want to marry you," Orpheus said one evening as they sat by a campfire under stars so bright they seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. They were camped in the hills above a small coastal town where they'd spent 3 days helping repair damage from a recent storm. Eurydice looked up from the bundle of herbs she'd been sorting, her face glowing in the firelight. "Are you asking or telling?" "Asking," he said, suddenly nervous in a way he'd never been with his music. Hoping, begging if necessary. She laughed, a sound like silver bells carried on a summer wind. "Yes," she said simply. "Of course, yes." Their wedding preparations became a community effort that spanned dozens of villages. Word spread that the musician whose songs could make stones weep, and the healer whose touch could coax life from barren ground were going to marry, and people came from across the region to help celebrate. Artisans donated their finest work, a dress of silk so fine it seemed woven from moonbeams, a crown of flowers that stayed fresh despite the heat, a feast that included delicacies from every corner of Greece. Musicians who had heard Orpheus play begged for the honor of providing accompaniment, though they all agreed that nothing could match the groom's own gift. Their wedding day arrived with a dawn so spectacular that people said Apollo himself had painted the sky in celebration. Streams of gold and pink and purple flowed across the heavens like visible music, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Flowers bloomed out of season throughout the region, roses in winter, spring lilies beside autumn chrysanthemums, as if nature itself were too excited to follow the normal rules of time. Springs that had run dry for decades suddenly bubbled with clear water. Trees that had been barren for years burst into fruit. Even the most cynical souls found themselves smiling for no reason they could name, as if joy itself had become contagious, spreading from heart to heart like ripples on a pond. The ceremony took place in a natural amphitheater formed by rolling hills, with an altar built from stones that had been singing, literally singing, since dawn. When Eurydice appeared at the top of the hill, walking slowly toward her beloved, a collective sigh went up from the hundreds of guests gathered to witness their union. She wore no jewelry except for flowers woven through her hair, but she radiated a beauty that made the morning sun seem dim by comparison. Her dress flowed around her like water made solid, catching the light with every step. Behind her walked a procession of young women scattering petals that seemed to glow where they touched the ground. Orpheus waited at the altar, his lyre silent for once, his entire being focused on the woman walking toward him. He had played for gods and kings, had moved audiences to tears and wild beasts to tameness, but he had never felt as nervous as he did in this moment. His hands, so steady on the lyre strings, trembled slightly as she approached. When she reached him and took his hands in hers, the first notes began to sound, not from his lyre, but from the air itself, as if their love had become so powerful it could create music without instruments. The guests looked around in wonder as harmony swelled around them, melodies that seemed to spring from the earth and descend from the heavens simultaneously. The priest who performed the ceremony later said he'd never spoken words that felt so charged with meaning, as if each vow was being written directly onto the fabric of the universe. When Orpheus and Eurydice kissed to seal their union, the music reached a crescendo that made the very ground beneath their feet vibrate with joy. The wedding feast stretched long into the evening, filled with laughter and music that seemed to lift everyone's spirits toward the heavens. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by grateful communities. Honey cakes from the village where they'd ended a drought, wine from vineyards they'd saved from blight, fruits and vegetables grown with seeds blessed by Eurydice's healing touch. Orpheus played, but quietly, his lyre speaking in intimate whispers rather than grand proclamations. This was their day, his and Eurydice's, and the music reflected that. Personal, tender, full of private jokes and shared memories already made precious by love. Between songs, he would catch his wife's eye. His wife, the thought still amazed him, and smile at some secret only they understood. Eurydice danced with her new husband, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground. When she laughed, which was often, the sound was like silver bells carried on a summer wind, and everyone who heard it felt their own hearts grow lighter. Guests commented later that they'd never seen two people so perfectly matched, as if the fates themselves had woven their threads together from the moment of their births. "Look at them," whispered an old grandmother to her daughter as they watched the couple move through the crowd, greeting their guests and accepting congratulations. "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? They glow like they've got light living inside them." "It's love," the daughter replied, bouncing her baby on her hip. "Real love, the kind that makes everything else look pale by comparison." As the evening wore on and the last of the wine was poured, guests began to drift away to their camps and guest quarters, calling out final congratulations and promises to visit soon. The musicians packed their instruments, still humming melodies from the celebration. Children fell asleep in their mother's arms, exhausted by a day of pure joy. "I want to show you something," Eurydice said as the celebration began to wind down, taking Orpheus by the hand. Her eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper, a desire to share with her husband one of her most sacred places. "There's a place I go when I need to think, a meadow where the flowers grow in patterns that look almost like music made visible." "Everything looks like music to me when I'm with you," Orpheus replied, but he followed willingly as she led him away from the lingering guests and the glowing embers of the feast fires. They slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand through paths lit by torchlight and starshine. The night air was warm and sweet with the scent of jasmine and night-blooming cereus, flowers that saved their perfume for the dark hours when their beauty might otherwise go unnoticed. Crickets provided a gentle symphony, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale offered its liquid song to the darkness. "It's just beyond that grove," Eurydice said, pointing to a stand of ancient oak trees whose branches formed a natural archway. "The moonlight falls there in such a way that you'll swear you can see music in the grass patterns. I discovered it when I was very young, gathering herbs with my mother. She said it was a place where the earth dreams, and sometimes those dreams become visible to those who know how to look." They entered the grove, their footsteps muffled by centuries of fallen leaves that rustled softly beneath their feet. The oaks were old beyond counting, their massive trunks scarred by time and weather, but still strong, still reaching toward the sky with branches that seemed to cradle the moon itself. Spanish moss draped from the limbs like delicate curtains, and between their roots wildflowers grew in spirals and curves that did indeed look like visible melodies frozen in time. "It's beautiful," Orpheus breathed, understanding immediately why this place called to her. There was something timeless here, something that spoke of the deep magic running beneath the world's surface. The very air seemed to hum with potential, as if this grove existed at the intersection of the mortal world and something infinitely larger. Eurydice bent to touch one of the flower patterns, tracing its curve with her finger while her wedding dress pooled around her like liquid moonlight. "Sometimes I think the earth itself is trying to sing," she said, glowing in the dappled light that filtered through the ancient branches. "And in places like this, we can almost hear it. Can you feel it?" Orpheus knelt beside her, placing his hand on the ground where the flowers formed their mysterious spirals. Through his fingertips, he could sense something, a deep vibration, like the heartbeat of the world itself. It was similar to what he felt when he played his lyre,
but older, more primal, as if this was the source from which all music flowed. "I feel it," he whispered, wonder coloring his voice. "It's like the earth is keeping time for a song too big for us to hear all at once." "Exactly," Eurydice said, her face radiant with joy at his understanding. "My mother taught me that some places are thin, thin between what we can see and what really is. This grove is one of them." "I feel it," she whispered, wonder coloring his voice. "It's like the earth is keeping time for a song too big for us to hear all at once." They spent an hour exploring the patterns, tracing the flower spirals, and listening to the way the wind through the oak leaves created its own melodies. Orpheus hummed softly along with the natural music, and Eurydice showed him which plants grew in harmony and which seemed to avoid each other, creating their own visual rhythm in the underbrush. It should have been perfect. It was perfect. Two people deeply in love, sharing something beautiful and sacred on their wedding night. The air was warm, the moon was bright, and the ancient grove wrapped around them like a blessing from the earth itself. That's when they heard the rustling in the underbrush. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a small animal moving through the night. A rabbit, perhaps, or a fox hunting for mice. The sound was soft, almost tentative, the kind of noise the forest made constantly as its nocturnal residents went about their business. But as they listened, the rustling became more purposeful, more regular. Footsteps, human footsteps, but trying to be quiet, trying not to be noticed. Orpheus rose slowly to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his lyre. Music had always been his shield as much as his gift, and he'd learned long ago that the right melody could calm even the most aggressive wild beast or hostile stranger. Beside him, Eurydice had gone very still, her connection to the natural world telling her that something was wrong, that the normal rhythms of the grove had been disturbed. "Who's there?" Orpheus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the grove, but maintaining the calm, non-threatening tone he'd perfected during his years of traveling. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched between the trees like a held breath, broken only by the distant call of an owl and the whisper of wind through the ancient branches. But the quality of the silence was wrong. Not the natural quiet of a forest at night, but the tense stillness of someone hiding, someone watching. Then a man stepped into the moonlight, and Orpheus felt his blood turn cold. Eurystheus, the son of Apollo, known throughout the region for his mastery of beekeeping and his persistent, unwelcome pursuit of beautiful women. He was handsome in the way that divine blood could make a man handsome. Perfect features, golden hair that caught the light even in darkness, a body that spoke of supernatural strength. But there was something wrong with his eyes, something hungry and possessive that made Orpheus's skin crawl. Those eyes were fixed on Eurydice with an intensity that made the grove feel suddenly smaller, more confined. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he believes he owns, something that has been unfairly kept from him. "What a pleasant surprise," Eurystheus said, his voice smooth as honey, but with an edge that cut like a blade. "The happy couple, alone at last." He stepped closer,
his movements fluid and confident, like a predator approaching cornered prey. "You know, my dear," he continued, speaking directly to Eurydice while ignoring Orpheus completely, "you could have had a god's son. Instead, you chose a mere musician." "Leave us alone," Orpheus said, stepping protectively in front of his wife. He could feel the tension radiating from her body, the way she'd gone very still and alert, like a deer sensing a wolf nearby. "This is our wedding night. Show some respect." Eurystheus laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the kind of laugh that spoke of power misused, of desires that brooked no obstacle. "Oh, but I have something to offer that you cannot, sweet musician. I have power, real power, not just pretty songs that make flowers bloom." He took another step closer, and now his intentions were clear in every line of his body, every predatory gesture. "I have divine blood in my veins," he continued, his voice taking on the commanding tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I can offer immortality, a place among the gods themselves. What can you give her? A life of wandering from village to village, playing for peasants and sleeping under the stars?" "I can give her love," Orpheus replied, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. "Real love, freely given and freely received, not the kind that takes by force." "Love," Eurystheus scoffed. "Such a mortal concept, so limited." His gaze returned to Eurydice, drinking in her beauty like a man dying of thirst. "You know what I offer, beautiful one. You know what you could become. All you have to do is come with me willingly." "Never," Eurydice said, speaking for the first time since Eurystheus had appeared. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the kind of strength that comes from absolute certainty. "I chose my husband freely, just as I choose to refuse you freely. Leave this place." The rejection hit Eurystheus like a physical blow. His perfect features twisted with rage and humiliation, the divine composure cracking to reveal something ugly beneath. "Freely?" he snarled. "You think you understand what freedom is? Let me show you what power really means." "I said, leave us alone." Orpheus's voice carried a note of command now, the same tone he used to gentle wild beasts and calm storms. The lyre in his hands began to sing softly, almost of its own accord, weaving a melody designed to soothe anger and promote peace. But Eurystheus was immune to such magic, his divine blood protecting him from mortal influence. If anything, the music seemed to enrage him further, reminding him of everything he lacked despite his power, the ability to create beauty, to inspire love rather than demand it, to touch hearts instead of simply commanding bodies. "Enough!" he roared, lunging forward with the sudden violence of a storm breaking. "If you won't come willingly, then—" "Run," Eurydice whispered, her voice barely audible but urgent with fear. "Orpheus, run!" But neither of them moved fast enough. Eurystheus surged toward them with inhuman speed, his hands reaching for Eurydice with grabbing desperation. She twisted away from his grasp, her wedding dress catching on the thorns of a wild rosebush as she stumbled backward. The silk tore with a sound like a sob,
and she cried out, not in pain, but in fury at having this sacred place, this perfect night, violated by unwelcome desire. Orpheus started toward her, his lyre falling from his hands as he reached out to steady her fall. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching like honey in winter cold. He could see everything with terrible clarity, the fear in her eyes, the rage on Eurystheus's face, the way the moonlight caught the torn fabric of her dress as she fought to keep her balance. That's when she stepped on the snake. It happened so quickly that later Orpheus would replay the moment over and over in his mind, trying to understand how paradise could turn to nightmare in the space of a single heartbeat. The serpent, disturbed from its rest among the roots of an ancient oak, had been coiled in the shadows where the moonlight didn't reach. It was an old snake, thick as a man's arm, with fangs that carried venom potent enough to kill a bull. Eurydice's bare foot, exposed when her sandal caught on a root during her desperate attempt to escape Aristeus's grasp, came down directly on the snake's back. The creature, startled from sleep and feeling the threat of being crushed, struck with the lightning-quick precision that millions of years of evolution had given it. Its fangs found the soft flesh of her ankle, sinking deep into the delicate skin just above the bone. She cried out, not in fear, but in sudden, sharp pain that cut through the night like a blade through silk. The sound was unlike anything Orpheus had ever heard her make, raw and primal and wrong. The snake, its job done, slithered away into the underbrush with the unhurried movements of a creature that knew it had nothing more to fear. It left behind only the echo of disaster and 2 perfect puncture wounds that were already beginning to darken as venom spread through Eurydice's bloodstream. "Eurydice!" Orpheus caught her as she fell, her body already growing heavy in his arms. The snake's venom was potent, designed to bring down prey much larger than a single human woman. He could feel her pulse racing as her heart worked frantically to pump poisoned blood through her system. Aristeus had frozen at the sight of the serpent, his face going white with shock and something that might have been remorse. The rage that had driven him to chase them into the grove evaporated in an instant, replaced by the terrible understanding of what his actions had caused. I never meant." But Orpheus wasn't listening. All his attention was focused on the woman in his arms, on the way her breathing was becoming shallow and rapid, on the spreading darkness of venom working its way through her bloodstream like spilled ink through water. Her skin was growing pale, then gray, then blue around the edges as the poison did its deadly work. "Hold on," he whispered, pressing his face against her hair, breathing in the scent of jasmine and herbs that had always surrounded her. "Hold on, my love. I'll find a way. I'll fix this." Eurydice tried to speak, her voice coming in gasps that tore at his heart like physical wounds. "The music," she managed, her hand finding his cheek with movements that were growing weaker by the moment. "Keep playing. Don't let the silence take it all." "Don't talk like that," Orpheus said, but he could feel her growing colder in his arms, could see the way her eyes were losing their focus, the light in them dimming like candles guttering in the wind. "You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. It's just..." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were lies.
The venom was too strong, had worked too quickly. In the space of minutes, she had gone from dancing at their wedding to dying in his arms beneath the ancient oaks. The cruelty of it, the sheer arbitrary injustice, hit him like a physical blow that left him gasping. Aristeus had disappeared into the night, fleeing the scene of the disaster he'd caused, but his absence didn't matter. Nothing mattered now except the woman whose life was ebbing away, like music fading into silence, like light dimming at the end of the day. "I love you," Eurydice whispered, her hand finding his cheek with the last of her strength. Her touch was gentle, even now, even as death claimed her. "Find me, somehow. Promise me, find me." "I promise," Orpheus choked out, knowing it was an impossible vow, but unable to deny her anything, even in this final moment. "I swear to you, I'll find a way." And then she was gone. The silence that followed was unlike anything Orpheus had ever experienced. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest or the expectant hush before a song begins. This was the silence of endings, of finality, of doors closing forever. It pressed against his ears like deep water, drowning him in its absolute emptiness. He held her body until dawn, unwilling to accept what his eyes could see and his heart could feel. When the sun finally rose, painting the grove in golden light that seemed obscene in its beauty, he understood that his old life, their life, was over. The world had revealed its true nature, a place where love could be destroyed in an instant by the careless actions of the powerful and the random cruelty of fate. The wedding guests found him there hours later, still cradling Eurydice's still form, his face streaked with tears that had long since dried. They tried to comfort him, these good people who had celebrated with them only hours before. They spoke of the will of the gods, of fate, of how sometimes tragedy strikes without reason or warning. But their words felt hollow, meaningless against the enormity of his loss. They offered to help with funeral preparations, to build a pyre worthy of her beauty, to sing the traditional songs that would guide her spirit to rest. He thanked them mechanically, going through the motions of grief that society expected, but inside he felt nothing but a growing emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. The funeral was beautiful. The entire region came to pay their respects to the woman who had brought healing and joy to so many communities. They brought flowers until the pyre looked like a mountain of blooms, each blossom a testament to a life she had touched, a person she had helped. When the fire was lit, Orpheus played his lyre for the last time in the world of the living. The music that emerged was unlike anything he had ever created. Not beautiful, but true. It spoke of loss so profound it made the earth itself weep, of love so deep it could not be contained by death, of a pain so vast it dwarfed mountains and oceans. Everyone who heard it was changed. Birds fell silent in the trees. Wild animals emerged from the forest to listen, their eyes filled with an understanding that transcended species. Even the flames of the pyre seemed to dance in time with his melodies, as if death itself were paying homage to the power of love. But as he sat there, watching the fire consume the body of his beloved, feeling the weight of loss settling into his bones like winter cold,
another realization began to take shape. His music had moved trees and tamed wild beasts. It had made rivers change their course and brought harmony to natural enemies. If love could give such power to mortal music, what might grief do? What might desperate, absolute, world-shaking love be capable of? The gods had given him a gift beyond measure. Now it was time to discover what that gift could truly accomplish when wielded not for joy, but for the kind of love that would rather face the impossible than accept defeat, the kind of love that would challenge death itself. As the last flames died and the ashes cooled, Orpheus looked down at his lyre, then up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere beyond the world of the living, she was waiting. Somewhere in the realm where even gods feared to tread, she was lost and alone, calling his name in a voice only he could hear. The question wasn't whether he would go after her. The question was whether his music, backed by a love that burned brighter than the sun and ran deeper than the roots of mountains, would be enough to bring her home. The entrance to the underworld lay hidden in a cave so deep and dark that even the bravest mortals turned back before reaching its threshold. But Orpheus walked forward without hesitation, his lyre clutched against his chest like armor made of music and memory. Behind him, the world of the living grew smaller with each step, sunlight fading to gray, then to black, the familiar sounds of birds and wind replaced by something far more ancient and final. The air grew thick and cold, tasting of minerals and secrets buried beneath the earth for millennia. His footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow passages, each sound seeming to multiply and scatter into the darkness ahead. But he pressed on, guided not by sight, for there was nothing to see, but by the pull in his chest that told him she was here, somewhere in this realm of shadows, waiting. The river Styx appeared before him like a mirror made of liquid night, its waters so still they seemed solid, reflecting nothing. Charon, the ferryman, stood motionless in his boat, a figure carved from darkness and duty. For 1,000 years he had carried souls across these waters, and never once had he transported anyone who still drew breath. "Turn back, musician." Charon's voice was the sound of pebbles grinding together, worn smooth by centuries of repetition. "This river carries only the dead." Orpheus lifted his lyre, and the first notes that emerged were unlike anything he had ever played. Not melodies of joy or celebration, but music that spoke of love so deep it could not be contained by death. The song told the story of two hearts that had found each other across all the wide world, of promises made under starlight, of a love that had made even the gods pause in wonder. As the music flowed across the water, something extraordinary happened. The river Styx, which had flowed in perfect silence for eternity, began to sing back. Its dark waters rippled with harmonies older than time, and Charon, ancient, implacable Charon, felt tears he had forgotten how to shed track down his weathered cheeks.
The boat moved across the water without oar or sail, guided by melodies that had convinced even death's guardian to show mercy. When they reached the far shore, Charon helped Orpheus step onto the dark sand, his ancient hands surprisingly gentle. "The path ahead leads to the palace of Hades himself," Charon said. "But know this, living man, your music has given me the first beautiful thing I have experienced in 1,000 years. For that gift alone, you have my gratitude." Orpheus walked deeper into the underworld, past fields where the spirits of the dead wandered like morning mist. They turned to watch him pass, these souls who had forgotten what it meant to feel, drawn by music that reminded them of everything they had lost. Some began to follow, their translucent forms trailing behind him like a procession of memories given shape. The palace of Hades rose before him, built from obsidian and shadow, its towers reaching up into darkness that had no ceiling. Guards stood at the gates, creatures of bone and iron, whose duty was to keep the living out and the dead in. But when Orpheus played, they stepped aside without a word, their eternal vigilance overwhelmed by melodies that spoke of love stronger than death itself. In the great hall, Hades and Persephone sat upon thrones carved from a single midnight stone. The lord of the underworld was exactly as the stories described, tall and stern, with eyes that had seen the final breath of every mortal who had ever lived. Beside him, Persephone radiated a beauty that seemed to glow even in this place of eternal shadow. Her presence a reminder that spring could bloom even in the realm of the dead. "You dare bring light into my kingdom?" Hades asked, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "You dare play songs of life in the halls of death?" "I dare," Orpheus replied, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to steal his breath. "I come seeking what was taken from me unjustly." "Nothing is taken unjustly here," Hades said. "All souls come to me in their time, as yours will one day come. The woman you seek belongs to my realm now." "Then let me earn her back," Orpheus said, raising his lyre. "Let my music speak for me." What followed was a song that made the very foundations of the underworld tremble. Orpheus played the story of his love, not just the happy moments, but all of it. The loneliness he had carried before meeting Eurydice, the way she had completed something in him he hadn't even known was broken. He played their first meeting, their first kiss, their wedding day when the whole world had seemed to celebrate with them. Then came the darker notes, the sound of footsteps in a sacred grove, the hiss of a serpent disturbed from sleep, the terrible silence that followed her last breath. The music wept with him as he played their final moments together, and even the dead stopped their eternal wandering to listen. But it was when he played of his love for her, not past tense, but present, burning as bright as ever, that the true magic happened. The music spoke of a love that death could not diminish, that separation could not weaken, that would endure beyond the ending of the world itself. Persephone began to weep, remembering her own love story, how Hades had taken her from the bright world above, how she had learned to love this dark kingdom and the stern god who ruled it. She understood what it meant to be separated from everything familiar, what it meant to find love in the most unlikely places. Even Hades felt something stir in his ancient heart. In all his eons of rule, he had never heard music that could make the stones themselves weep. The sound of Orpheus's love was like spring water in a desert, like dawn after the longest night. "Enough," Hades said at last, but his voice was gentler now. "I have heard what you came to play. Your love is considerable." From the shadows behind the throne, a familiar figure emerged. Eurydice walked forward, her form translucent but unmistakably herself. When she saw Orpheus, her face lit with joy so pure it illuminated the dark hall like captured sunlight. "You came," she whispered, her voice carried on wind that tasted of home. "You actually came for me." "I promised I would find you," Orpheus replied, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously at the sight of her. "I gave you my word." Hades watched this reunion with something that might have been sympathy. "Your music has moved even my wife to tears," he said, "and that is no small feat. I will make you a bargain, Orpheus of Thrace." The Lord of the Dead stood from his throne, his presence filling the hall like approaching thunder. "I will return Eurydice to the world of the living, but there is a condition." "Anything," Orpheus said immediately. "You must walk before her on the path back to the surface. She will follow behind you, but you must not look back at her, not even once, until you both stand in the sunlight of the upper world. If you turn to look upon her before you reach the light, she will be lost to you forever." It seemed simple enough. A walk through dark tunnels, Eurydice behind him, safety and reunion waiting in the sunlight above. Orpheus bowed deeply to the god of the dead. "I accept your terms," he said. "Then go," Hades commanded. "And remember, love that is truly strong trusts even when it cannot see." They began the long journey back to the world of the living. Orpheus walked ahead, his every step echoing in the narrow tunnels that led upward toward light. Behind him, he could hear Eurydice's footsteps, soft, careful, but definitely there. The sound was like music to his ears, proof that she was real, that she was following, that they were going home together. The path seemed longer than it had on his way down. Every step felt like an eternity, every turn in the tunnel like a test of his resolve. He wanted desperately to look back, to see her face, to reassure himself that she was truly there and not just an echo of his desperate hope. "Keep walking," he whispered to himself. "Just keep walking. She's there. You can hear her. She's following. Just a little further." But as they climbed higher, doubt began to creep in like cold wind through cracks in stone. What if Hades had deceived him? What if the footsteps he heard were just echoes of his own? What if he was walking alone through these tunnels, clinging to false hope, while Eurydice remained forever lost in the realm of the dead? The silence between the footsteps seemed to grow longer,
more ominous. Was she slowing down? Was she fading away? The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him like the mountain above their heads. "Eurydice?" he called softly, not daring to look back, but needing some sign that she was still there. "I'm here," came her voice, warm and real and achingly familiar. "Keep going, my love. I'm right behind you." The sound of her voice gave him strength to continue. Up and up they climbed, through passages that grew slowly warmer, where the air began to carry the faint promise of growing things. He could smell earth now, and somewhere far above, the green scent of leaves turning toward sun. Light appeared ahead, not the harsh brightness of day, but the gentle gray that spoke of dawn approaching. They were almost there, almost home, almost safe. That's when he heard her stumble. The sound of her falling, of her crying out in pain, hit him like a physical blow. Without thinking, driven by love and concern that overwhelmed all other considerations, Orpheus spun around to help her. And there she was, beautiful, radiant, reaching toward him with love shining in her eyes. For one perfect moment, they saw each other clearly, completely. He could see the joy in her face, the relief that they had almost made it, the love that had called him down to the darkest places of the world. Then she began to fade. "No," Orpheus breathed, reaching for her even as she became translucent, even as the laws of the underworld reclaimed what he had almost won. "It's all right," Eurydice said, her voice growing distant, but filled with peace. "You came for me. You proved that love is stronger than death, even if we can't escape death's rules. That's enough. That has to be enough." "I'm sorry," Orpheus cried, his hands passing through her fading form. "I'm so sorry. I should have trusted." "Don't be sorry," she whispered, her form now barely visible in the growing light. "You loved me enough to walk into hell itself. You loved me enough to make the gods weep. What more could any soul ask for?" She was gone, pulled back to the realm of shadow by his moment of doubt. But the light ahead remained, and Orpheus found himself standing at the mouth of the cave, dawn breaking over a world that looked exactly the same, but felt completely different. He emerged into the morning like a man waking from the deepest dream. The sun on his face felt foreign after the darkness below. The sound of birds singing seemed too bright, too innocent for what he had experienced. But he was alive, and he carried with him something that death itself could not touch: the knowledge that love, real love, transcends every boundary that gods or fate can set. In the months that followed, Orpheus wandered the world again, but his music had changed. It no longer spoke only of joy or only of sorrow, but of the full scope of what it meant to love completely. People said his songs could heal broken hearts because they acknowledged that some pain is too deep for easy comfort, that some losses remake us entirely. He never married again, never sought to replace what he had lost. But in the quiet places of the earth, hidden groves and secret meadows where flowers grew in patterns that looked like music made visible,
People sometimes heard him playing, and those who heard said his melodies carried a peace that came only from understanding that love, once true, never truly dies.
When his own time came to cross the river Styx, Charon was waiting with a smile that had not been seen on the ferryman's face in 1,000 years. "Welcome back, musician," the ancient boatman said. "She's been waiting for you." And in the realm beyond the river, where time moves differently and separation is just another word for the pause between movements in an eternal song, Orpheus found what he had always been seeking. Not a love that could escape death, but a love that made death itself irrelevant. They say that on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the world is very quiet, you can still hear their music drifting from the underworld. Two voices joined in perfect harmony, singing of a love that chose itself over life itself, and in choosing, found something greater than either life or death could offer. Peace.